This week on Brian Ross Investigates, the executioner comes for the Trump Five, the 4 men and 1 woman ordered by the Justice Department to be executed before President Trump leaves office next month.
Mr. Trump's administration has scheduled more executions for the transition period than have ever occurred in the history of the United States.
President-elect Biden has vowed to end the death penalty for federal prisoners, but there are few legal challenges left for the Trump Five, 2 set to be put to death just this week.
This seems like a mad rush to swing a wrecking ball through our Justice Administration as this administration is on its way out the door.
Plus, the vaccine countdown. With federal approval expected any day for the COVID-19 vaccine, lingering questions about who will get it and when, and why so many people are already saying they don't want it.
Poll after poll shows up to half of Americans surveyed are hesitant to take the COVID vaccine when it first rolls out.
And what about pregnant women? What about children? We're joined by Dr. Irwin Redlener and this week's winners and losers in the media. See if you agree with what the editors of Mediaite have to say.
For the Attorney General of the United States to make that statement, he is either a liar or a fool or both.
From the Law&Crime Trial Network, this is Brian Ross Investigates. Good evening, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to our viewers on Facebook Live. I'm Brian Ross, joined as always by my colleague Rhonda Schwartz. And Rhonda, we're going to get to the race for the vaccine in just a moment. But first, the unseemly race to execute 5 prisoners on federal death row set to be put to death in the waning days of the Trump administration. Rhonda?
That's right. And all 5 of these executions have been set to be carried out before Joe Biden is sworn in as president. And during his campaign, you'll recall, he expressed his intention to work to end the federal death penalty when he was President Biden.
Since the Trump administration reinstated the death penalty over the summer, 8 federal death row inmates have already been executed this year. Not since 1889, in the final days of the Grover Cleveland presidency, has the United States put to death any inmate during the transition period. Here are the 5 set to be put to death before Trump leaves office in January. Brandon Bernard, this week. Alfred Bourgeois, this week. Lisa Montgomery, January 12th. Corey Johnson, January 14th. Dustin Higgs, January 15th. We're joined now by Robert Dunham, the Executive Director of the Death Penalty Information Center, and Henderson Hill, Senior Counsel at the ACLU's Capital Punishment Project. Mr. Hill, let me start with you. At this point, is there much that could be done to stop any of these executions before Donald Trump leaves office?
Well, Brian, my typical response would be there's an appeal to mercy. There's an appeal to justice. And when you've got scheduled executions of a young man that was 18 at the time of the crime, a young woman who suffered a history of sexual abuse that makes the knees buckle just thinking about it, a serious history of serious mental illness, and the doors closed. I'm not working directly with the defense teams, but it's hard to see the path for clemency or any form of mercy to work its way through this administration.
Mr. Dunham, the Justice Department says it's just carrying out the law, but do you see a race to carry out these executions before the end of the Trump administration?
I think that's unquestionable. What we're seeing right now is a pattern of conduct that has no precedent in American presidential history, and it's out of step not just with presidential history, but with the practices of the states today. Mr. Trump's administration has scheduled more executions for the transition period than have ever occurred in the history of the United States. You've got to go back into the 1800s before you have any administration that had even more than one execution during a transition period. And this year, we will see fewer executions by the states in the United States than we've seen in more than 35 years. At the same time, we have a federal administration that is carrying out a record number of executions. I think what we're seeing here is an historical aberration.
But you don't see any effort on the part of the Supreme Court to step in here, do you, or to lend a sympathetic ear to the people on death row?
Well, that depends on what the issue is. There's been ongoing litigation over the legality of the execution process, and the federal district court has on numerous occasions declared different parts of the protocol, the execution plan, either illegal or unconstitutional. The United States Supreme Court has lifted all stays, vacated all injunctions that relate to the execution process. So I think it's very unlikely that there will be a stay of execution based on the way in which the executions are to be carried out. That doesn't mean there aren't substantive issues in the individual cases. Two of the individuals who are scheduled to be executed, Corey Johnson and Alfred Bourgeois, have very strong claims that they're intellectually disabled and are not constitutionally eligible for execution. There is an avenue potentially for them based on the fact that the federal death penalty statute says you cannot carry out an execution against somebody who is intellectually disabled. The Supreme Court has not yet ruled on that issue, and that gives some possibility that they could get relief.
Mr. Hill, these crimes these men are convicted of are particularly brutal and grisly murders. It's hard to get sympathy for them, isn't it?
Well, our nation experiences 15,000 murders a year. Each one of them are brutal. Each one of them are devastating to families and communities across the country. And these murders are no less brutal. I think the question that we're constantly posed with the death penalty is whether, given the way the system of justice works, given the lack of a social safety net, given the tremendous histories of sexual abuse and childhood trauma that many of the folks involved with these crimes have experienced, and in the folks who are facing execution, the evidence about these social histories have not been presented to a jury or considered on the merits by many of the courts. So the question really becomes whether or not, given that situation, we're entitled to kill these prisoners. And the observation that a society's level of civilization is judged by how it treats its prisoners rings true here. This seems like a mad rush to swing a wrecking ball through our justice administration as this administration is on its way out the door. It's shameful.
And finally, Mr. Hill, let me ask you, what would your message be to the 4 men and the 1 woman who are on death row facing execution before January 20th?
That there are many people in this country that wish and hope and are working to avoid this ugly end. And that there are many communities throughout the country that are affirming their commitment to life and to appreciate that many of these folks have lived real lives of redemption. And we see that, we notice that, we hear and see that. And across the country, there are states that are moving to end this barbaric relic. Yeah, I live in North Carolina. We haven't had an execution in 14 years. We're a slave-holding state, formerly. Louisiana, another slave-holding state, hasn't had an execution in 18 years. So we are moving towards a period of respecting the value of life, appreciating the power of redemption and remorse. And we hope that the doors open for the 4 or 5 people with these bad prospects. But they should know that there are people standing up for them and for the value of life. And we appreciate their acts of remorse and redemption.
Henderson Hill, Senior Counsel at the ACLU's Capital Punishment Project, and Robert Dunham, Executive Director of the Death Penalty Information Center. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Coming up next, the latest on the vaccine, what it means for all of us, what it means for our children. You're watching Brian Ross Investigates on the Law and Crime Trial Network. For many of us, this year has seemed like we're living in a Dickens novel, the best of times, the worst of times. A vaccine coming for COVID-19, yet daily records set for the number of deaths in this country. Rhonda?
That's right, Brian. And Charles Dickens also wrote about the age of foolishness, and we certainly have seen plenty of that as well this year.
Indeed. Well, we're now joined by the perfect antidote for foolishness, Dr. Irwin Redlener, an MSNBC analyst, the founding director of Columbia University's National Center for Disaster Preparedness, and the author of a new book, The Future of Us: What Children's Dreams Mean for America in the 21st Century. And Dr. Redlener, thank you so much. You are the gold standard when it comes to what's really going on. Give us a dose of reality, given all the hopes about this vaccine.
Thanks, Brian. So, I've been the sort of classic glass half empty person, and been looking to make sure that we're not fooling ourselves about what's coming and what's not coming. But as far as the vaccines are concerned, Brian, we have a very, very great opportunity here to start getting control over this horrendous pandemic, which seems to be getting worse by the day. And the trajectory for it going forward is really not looking good. But the vaccines offer a tremendous promise of having a lot of people become not susceptible to getting COVID. There are many, many caveats here and lots of issues around manufacturing, transporting, distributing it, and actually getting it into people's arms. So this is not to say it's a magic bullet that's going to just change everything tomorrow, but it is offering a lot of hope coming into the future. We have the two vaccines that are really on the verge of getting their approval from the FDA for this emergency use authorization. They're the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, and AstraZeneca's vaccine that they've been working on with Oxford University in the UK will also be ready shortly. So there's real hope here, and I think that's important. That said, Brian, if I just may add that it is not going to allow us to really take our foot off the accelerator in terms of keeping up with the non-pharmaceutical steps and the public health guidelines, like wearing masks, keeping distant, being in well-ventilated rooms if we have to be in any kind of room whatsoever. But this is all what we're facing in the future coming up now.
And Doctor, where do you see this country and this world in terms of COVID-19 by, say, July 4th, by the beginning of summer?
Well, hopefully by July 4th, we'll be in a much better position. I think we may or may not be able to celebrate next year's Thanksgiving in November in a situation that's more similar, more akin to what we've been used to doing on Thanksgiving, which is getting together with family and friends and having a joyful holiday or a joyful Christmas and other winter holidays. By July, it's really hard to say, Brian. A lot will depend on how successful we are in assuring that all the vaccines available are in fact safe and that they work, and they'll be able to be distributed to be able to get to people and really get the injection, to get this difference between the vaccine and getting vaccinated. And that difference is significant. I think we'll be able to overcome it, but we have work to do.
And Doctor, a question for you from Rhonda Schwartz. Rhonda?
Hi, Rhonda.
Hello, Dr. Redlener. In your new book, you talk about the dreams of children. This is one of your specialties. What is this pandemic doing to the future of America's children? What should we do about it?
Yes, Ron, it's a really good question, because I think the impact on children has not been discussed enough. And I don't mean just because of the disease, and children do get COVID far less frequently than adults do. But what has happened to them is that children who are on the margins before the pandemic, children who are struggling in school, children who need special education, children who need just continuity of education, those children have suffered enormously from the disruption in their education and being able to go to school. And we're going to have a lot to make up for. We can't have these millions of children fall farther behind than they were before the pandemic. And that's really what I'm afraid of. And really, it's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of investment to make sure that we've helped these kids get back on track, Rhonda.
Is it your position, doctor, that schools should absolutely stay open as opposed to bars and restaurants?
Well, a lot of places have done this, Brian, as you're implicating, upside down. They've kept bars and restaurants open and closed schools. I think that's sort of more or less the opposite of what we should be doing. We should do everything in our power to make sure that education is available to kids and they get back in school as quickly as possible. But to control the community spread, we definitely need to be still closing the bars and restaurants and other facilities and gyms and so on that have become spreader opportunities. Keeping children in school has overwhelming necessity for us.
And doctor, finally, you say you're a glass half empty man. Do you get depressed? Do you get down? Do you find you give up hope at some point?
I can't, Brian. I have 6 grandchildren and a big family that we all have to keep up our spirits and keep getting through this. And I think that from a policy point of view, I'm always a little skeptical. From a personal point of view, I'm kind of an angry optimist, is how I characterize myself. We've had a horrible 4 years that we're hopefully finishing up next few weeks with the Trump administration, but we're on to bigger and better things, and hopefully a lot of hopefulness coming right up here. And I try to stay up because of my kids and grandchildren. What can I say? That's my motivator.
Well, good for you. Thank you so much, Dr. Irwin Redlener, for joining us from Columbia University, an analyst at MSNBC. Thanks so much for being here tonight.
My pleasure. Thanks, Brian.
Coming up, this week's winners and losers in the media. See what the editors of Mediaite had to say about Jack Tapper. See if you agree. You're watching Brian Ross Investigates on the Law and Crime Trial Network. Time now for this week's winners and losers in the media, as chosen by the editors of Mediaite. And we're joined by the editor-in-chief of Mediaite, Aidan McLaughlin. Mediaite, like the Law and Crime Trial Network, all part of the Dan Abrams media empire. Aidan, thanks for being here. Let's start with the first winner, Jake Tapper at CNN, in this clip showing off his interviewing skills.
President Trump has not said if he's going to attend your inauguration yet. Do you think it's important that he's there? You're laughing.
I think it would important only in one sense, not in a personal sense, important in the sense that we are able to demonstrate at the end of this chaos that he's created, that there is peaceful transfer of power with the competing parties standing there, shaking hands and moving on.
And Aidan, Jake gets right to the heart of it there. He's really good at this, isn't he?
He really is. And, this was a win in and of itself, because this was the first sit down that a television journalist had with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, the incoming administration. It was a fascinating interview. It stretched the hour-long program last Thursday night. And Jake Tapper asked some really impressive questions. He kicked off with a fun one about how Joe Biden injured his foot. Joe Biden had a sort of interesting story about that, and then moved into more substantive stuff, like the transfer of power between President Donald Trump, who has still yet to concede the election, and Joe Biden. And then a lot of questions about policy and what the Biden administration plans to do in their first 100 days, particularly with the coronavirus crisis. He also, pressed the incoming administration on some of the criticism that they've faced from right and left. Overall, it was a really interesting and illuminating interview.
Absolutely. And now at the other end of the spectrum, absolutely, Lou Dobbs at Fox Business. Let's take a look at this clip.
To date, we have not seen fraud on a scale, he said, that could have affected a different outcome in the election. For the Attorney General of the United States to make that statement, he is either a liar or a fool or both. He may be perhaps compromised. He may be simply unprincipled.
Would it be fair to use the word unhinged when talking about Lou Dobbs, do you think, Aidan?
Definitely fair to use that word. So Lou Dobbs is a Fox Business host who is a intense Trump booster. The president watches his show, actually listens to him, takes advice from him. And Lou Dobbs is one of the more sort of obsequious of the Fox hosts when it comes to Trump. Now, last week and since the election, he's truly gotten unhinged. You saw in that clip there, he was suggesting that because Attorney General William Barr has said that they have yet to find evidence that there's enough voter fraud to have stolen the election from Donald Trump, he's saying that that means that Bill Barr must be either compromised or, sort of have lost his mind, he also suggested. That's crazy stuff. I mean, Brian, Bill Barr is not compromised. He's not a secret leftist who's out to destroy the Trump administration. He's just pointing out the obvious, that there's not enough evidence of fraud that would have swayed this election from Biden, who won quite decisively, to Trump. And it wasn't the only thing that Dobbs said this last week that was pretty nuts. He basically spent the whole week drumming up conspiracy theories about the election being stolen and mocking those who have faced violent threats and in order to sort of defend the election.
So in 15 seconds, why does Fox put up with it, or do they like that?
They'd catch hell from their viewership if they let him go, and he has good ratings, so they might as well bite their tongues and keep it going.
So he's got a place there on the schedule as long as he wants it, I guess.
Yeah, there's no sign that he's going anywhere, despite all of the things that he said that Fox executives know is crazy.
All right. Aidan McLaughlin, editor-in-chief of Mediaite, thank you so much for joining us for this week's Winners and Losers. And thanks to all of you for joining us here, and to our great staff at Law&Crime for getting us on the air and off the air.